Welcome, everybody, to the viewing room and high noon. Now, and today, by the way, as usual, I have Jennifer Bouani, Jacqueline Schumann, and Mark Pellegrino. Now, first, let me give you a little overview of this story very briefly. We have a sheriff on his wedding day, and on the noon train comes an old villain coming into this town. The sheriff is about to leave and retire with his wife and a shop, but he's kind of pulled back in based on some things we're going to be talking about. I think that's basically it. There's a very simple very good one line story in a sense. So we'll talk more about the plot, the story, the characters, all the cinematography, the acting, what it's all about. But first, let's have our 30-second review. And I'm actually going to start and we'll go through everybody. So I really love this. I used to think it was pretty good. I used to think it was horrible because I read some reviews that I probably shouldn't have. But now I think it's really, really great work of art. I really think it's a great work of art. And so I definitely give it thumbs up. I recommend it to people to watch, even if you end up don't liking it. I think I do have my disagreements on some thematic things that are happening, but that's not to say about the art, the artistry, and what's being conveyed, which we'll talk about. So that's my quick review. Loved it. I thought Gary Cooper was really good. I can't wait to hear Mark's view on his acting, but I was like, wow, that's impressive. I thought. Okay, so let's go. Jax, how about we have you 30 seconds?
I loved it as well. I had seen it a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, I guess, for the first time. So I really enjoyed watching it again. It's so interesting to go back and watch these really well done black and whites, where you don't have the benefit of a ton of special effects, and you're really reliant on your acting and the writing, I think. I really enjoyed Gary Cooper in this. I have thoughts too about his performance in this versus his performance. Wasn't he was Fountainhead too, right?
Yeah, he's Howard Rourke.
He played Howard Rourke. I don't think he actually understood the role of Howard Rourke very well. I think he understood this role quite well, as Will Kane. I thought Grace Kelly was really good in it as well. This was her kind of a breakout role for her. I think it was only her second time on screen. And the message was the message and the morality play of it, I thought, was very interesting. And not John Wayne actually famously came out to say that he hated the movie, which I think is interesting that we can talk about because he considered it to be un-American. And yet it happens to be two presidents' favorite movies, Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. Who Bill Clinton, I suppose, was rumored to have hosted 17 different screenings of High Noon at the White House. But yeah, I thought it was really good.
All right, Jennifer.
That's because Bill Clinton was looking at Grace Kelly.
Yeah, who wasn't? Who was it?
I wasn't.
Okay, I was.
I was less impressed with Grace Kelly.
Okay.
This film to me, I give kind of eh. I agree with you completely, Kirk. It is a great piece of art. That was my takeaway. It's very simplistic. It's universal. You have one character and his choices are separating us from civilization and chaos, and that's beautifully set up. I love that. And I don't know. I was less impressed with Grace Kelly. I was actually like the character Helen more. I think she was way more interesting. As far as the story goes, though, it seemed like it dragged on. Like it was set in real time. Like when they start the movie, it's like 10:40, and then something's going to happen at noon, and it's about how long the movie is, and it's basically you're following him around as he tries to convince this town, who may or may not really deserve it, to go and fight with him against this murderer. And I was just, he's on one aspect, he's a hero, but I think he's a one-dimensional hero. And maybe that's something we can talk about maybe he was a hero in the 50s, but I think today in modern times, he's kind of, okay. Those are my thoughts.
All right. Mark?
Yeah, so my feelings about the movie are very complicated. I saw it as a young man and was blown away by it. Today, of course, there are aspects of the film that do not, I think, come up to modern muster. If you watch something like The Bear and you love the style and the acting in that, this is going to leave you wanting because the acting is very stylized, very much of the time, and that doesn't translate to today. But that does mean what those characters were doing was occupying a frame that is actual art, not realism, but art. And so while I could have issues with aspects that we'll discuss that I don't think carry over into modern times, I think the thematic elements of the film are something that every child should be introduced to very early on in their development, whether a man or a woman. And because I think they have to do with integrity, although I think one could think that he's fighting for the town and sort of sacrificing himself for a town that's very unappreciative. I think there's a deeper thematic element with respect to him facing down evil, knowing that he can't run from it. He has to face it, which I think is
Exactly.
that we all have to learn. So not even story-wise, but just for the spirit of the movie, I have to give it a thumbs up, but I have to give it a thumbs sideways to down for elements that don't translate into modern times. So I would love to see this remade. The problem is, I think some of the values in it would be toxically masculine, and people would not relate. The younger generation would possibly not relate to it if it was a male character going through this. Possibly if it was a female, but not a male character.
Interesting. I wonder if it's even possible, given what the story's trying to say, I think, to do it with a female character. I think you'd have to fundamentally change the whole point of the story.
Well, what do you think the story's trying to say then?
So I
think it could work with a female character.
Well, maybe today we're, what is a woman? Like that's true. But I think one of the interesting things about this story to me and seeing it, one is, there's a lot of things about the ideal, and there's several moments of young boys, teenagers, and even the deputy in relation to the man. One of my favorite lines is by Helen, where she says to the deputy, you are a good-looking boy with broad shoulders, but he's a man. It takes more than shoulders to be a man. And I think there's the idea in the story. Again, this is the idea in the story. Whether you agree with this outside of it is different. But I think the idea in the story is that women are women because they just are. Men have to choose to be a man. You have to become a man. The whole point is arguments throughout the story of, he goes, knocks on your door. Are you a man? Come fight with me. He goes to the church. Are you a man? Come fight with me and defend the town. And then the women are like, what are you doing? Don't you remember what this is like? So this is all about the idea of choosing to be a man. That's essentially what it is. Again, yes, a lot of people will say that that's toxic masculinity today. Okay, whatever. But that's what the movie is saying.
I disagree.
Okay.
I don't disagree with what you're saying in terms of that story, that he is like going and knocking on doors and asking people to become men. But I think you could just as easily replace that with knocking on doors and asking people to be courageous and asking people to stand up for themselves. It may not sound as sexy as toxic masculinity, but I think that the movie had a broader message too. I thought, to me, the movie was, all it takes is for good people to do nothing, and then you lose a town. And he's the one person who's going to do nothing. He goes and everybody, he goes and he tries to deputize people, and one by one they drop away from him. And oddly, the only person that wants to fight with him is a 14-year-old boy who's trying really hard to be a man, right? But So I think the broader message is about kind of that line between civilized and non-civilized, and what do you do to stand up for yourself, basically. There's also other aspects that we could talk about too, in terms of pacifism, because in a sense, his wife, Grace Kelly's role, represents the pacifist perspective until, which I loved, actually. I think this is a great objectivist lesson, is, until something that mattered to her was threatened, until like she actually thought, she hears a gunshot and she thinks that it's her husband, she jumps right off the train to go and save him, because of course she's a Quaker and doesn't believe in violence. Her family was tragically killed by it. So and in the end, she's the only one that stays and fights with him.
Yeah.
Right? She becomes a man, right? She puts on her big boy pants and fights alongside. So I think this was less, to me, this story was less about what, like, manhood and what it is to be a man. Maybe you guys disagree. I don't know.
Well, this is why I said something like this would probably go over to the current generation as toxically masculine, because I agree with Kirk. There are strong aspects thematically, that a man is a moral judgment. It's not just a biological fact, it's a moral judgment, which is why I think Ludwig von Mises alluded to Rand as one of the best, Ayn Rand, to one of the best men he'd ever met. And she took that as a compliment, because whether that's a social construct or not, there are aspects to masculinity, which women could have too, that we judge as moral aspects. And
That's true.
And the point is important to be made, despite the resistance to it in our society today. And for me, the even deeper element is sort of alludes to what you were talking about, Jax, is evil prospers when good people do nothing. The idea that the man understands the nature of evil better than anyone else in the town, some of whom profit off of the evil and are mad at him because he actually quashed the evil. They have their own axes to grind with him. But he understands that the nature of evil is something that needs to be confronted, because it will chase you wherever you go. You can't run from it. You have to confront it and beat it. Because when I first saw the movie and being a young objectivist, I thought I would have done the end of the movie at the beginning, thrown my star in the ground and left the damn city, left the village to its own fate, because that's what it seemed like they wanted. But it wasn't about that. As a more mature man, I now see it was about personal integrity. It was about confronting evil. It was about fighting bad, where you have to, because if you don't, it will pursue you forever.
I agree.
And
Jennifer?
that's the part why I thought the heroic part of him was that he didn't run away from it. He faced it. He didn't evade the fact that this guy was going to come after him, and he'd find him at his house with his wife off on the prairie somewhere. He faced that, and I don't really think he was doing it for the town so much as for himself. My issue with him now is that we laud him for going and doing that, but he failed in a lot of ways, because he walked around the town and he didn't use negotiation skills. He didn't use leadership skills. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why John Wayne didn't like the movie, because I went and watched Rio Bravo, their rebuttal to that. I watched that last night to just see what that was about. And it's a similar situation where the main character has a bad guy coming to get them, but he has to talk these misfits into joining him, but he does it organically. And I feel like that's missing from this story, is his ability to do that. He just seems kind of like a cardboard guy, just like, okay, join me.
That's also sort of Gary Cooper's style, but you got to figure, he's been a marshal in the town for a long time. Everybody acknowledges, or at least a few people acknowledge, women are the first to acknowledge, made the town safe for women and children to walk around in. Now, if you have any grasp of the history of the West and how wild things must have been and what kind of man it took to tame a town like that and make it civil and bring law and order to it. That's a massive task. And so you'd think that he wouldn't have to really convince a lot of people. He'd just simply say, hey, I did this. This town is safe. I need help. Help me. And people would come flocking to his door. But that wasn't the case. And for me, I don't know John Wayne's beef, but for me, that would be my beef, because Americans do mostly, or at least at that time, seem to be unique in their desire to take up the flag, to take up the righteous cause and to fight for it, and not allow themselves to be bullied or cowed. So in that respect, I could, if that was his critique, I could see that. Nowadays, I think that crowd is more akin to what we see today.
It's really ironic that it was considered a commie propaganda film. And now today we're like, ooh, the left would probably hate it for its toxic masculinity. Wow.
Well,
What do you think
it
is
was-
way.
toxic masculine in it? Just how do you understanding that is applied to this, and just out of curiosity?
I'm not saying that. I think Mark was saying that.
Oh, okay.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the whole idea of male toughness, of aggression, of the capacity to use and direct aggression and physical violence, it has become an anathema, and they've sort of worked it into the entire masculine profile and defined it by that. But the capacity for that kind of action is a very powerful thing that men shouldn't reject. It's not in the Jordan Peterson sense where it's like, I have to control my animal, my beast. I have no idea what's in me. No, we're not all fucking murderers waiting to come out. But a man carries a real man, as his ex-girlfriend says, carries a moral strength. This is one of the things that made George Washington so powerful amongst 50, 60 founding fathers who were all far more educated than him. He carried himself as a man with great power and great moral stature, and that held the Union together. And it's against some very, very powerful forces, just the force of his masculinity. And it's being contaminated now by fear of aggression, fear of, I don't want to say the negative expressions of masculinity, but the physical expressions of masculinity that can be very terrifying.
Yeah, I wonder.
And
Oh,
I
go
think
ahead,
the
Jen.
only I actually think that it is kind of a it could be seen as a statement against toxic masculinity, in the sense that the criminals are the ones that are the toxic males, and he's fighting them. He's fighting against just the complete lawlessness and just, I think it was also really interesting how they kept cutting back to the criminals waiting for that train to come in, waiting for Frank Miller to show up, and all the things that they're doing, like, oh, I'm going to go into town and, get drunk. And they kept cutting back to that. And then you see this major difference between how they're carrying themselves, right? And how Gary Cooper is carrying himself. And they have they have a great conflict when one of the guys comes into town to get alcohol and runs into Gary Cooper and kind of have like a mini scuffle. But I mean, I guess I could see how today's woke universe would consider it to be toxically male or toxically masculine. But
they're not known for nuance. Let's just put it that way. That takes a nuanced brain to say, oh, there's men behaving immaturely. There's there's Bridges' character who's the very definition of an immature male,
right.
juxtaposed against a sober, strong, and strong-willed man. People don't make those distinctions anymore, unfortunately.
And I think I think probably one of the strongest males in this was Helen's character.
Why do you think she's the strongest male?
One of the strongest. I think Gary Cooper is the strongest male,
okay.
but because she's got, I mean, I'm sorry, she's got more balls than almost everybody in that town.
What does she do? Why do you say that?
Because she she knows what she wants. You get, first of all, it's obvious, like, I guess her husband must have died, left her money. She opens up a saloon or a shop. She is her own woman. She's taken up with Lloyd Bridges' character. But I mean, he's kind of like a dalliance for her. The second that he shows his immaturity and stupidity, she basically shows him the door, despite his trying to control her, like, no, this won't happen. She's like, yeah, don't, and slaps him. And then she also, it's this great interaction, I thought, between her and Grace Kelly's character, where she's telling Grace, if he was my man, I would stay and fight. And they kind of like make peace in a bit of in a way. There's like this jealousy thing that's happening, and then they make peace. And I think that she sort of gives Grace Kelly's character the seeds for how she needs to stand up for her husband, right? So I thought she was, and she decided, and she knew, she was like, I'm getting out of town. It's not, I don't think she was a coward at all. I think she was just very, in after her own interests, but she knew what she wanted to do.
To me, what makes the movie good in that sense is that it's a war of virtues. It's not like, amongst the main characters, Grace Kelly's character is a Quaker because she saw her own her siblings murdered. She witnessed that, and she decided to abide by a principle, and she's standing by that principle. And only her love for her man brings her back to save him. But to me, the other woman is
Helen.
Helen is just, yeah, she's a very powerful woman. I could see why the two of them, Kane and she, would be together. She is an independent, powerful woman who doesn't let herself get pushed around. So, so to me, it's a juxtaposition of three virtuous people sort of contending with each other. And in the end, Grace learns from the other, but I don't know that I would qualify her as masculine. I would, qualify her as a very independent, bold woman, and I could see why a man would love her.
Yeah, she's definitely independent. I mean, to me, she always came across as a little bit cynical because she's worldly and she's lived things, and she, not cynical is not the right, pragmatic, I guess is better. Like, she's practical. She's trying, whereas Grace Kelly, Amy's character, was to me a match because she's so frustratingly stolid with her principles. She has, whether you agree with her principles or not, that's the whole point. Like, they're both clashing. Like, he's saying no. He says, like, I turn around, he's at the thing, like, I gotta do it. Like, that's it. It's done. Like, it's an immovable object in an unstoppable force type thing. Like they are who they are. She's very, Grace Kelly is, I think, a really interesting, I'd almost call it foil in terms of her character, because she's so soft in her like her look to some degree, but she's very firm in her convictions. And to me, that's really an interesting juxtaposition for a contrast to him. Whereas Helen is, she is independent, and she's like, all right, I'm going to take $1,000 less. I got to go. I'm going to take it because I got to get out of here. Like, it's just like, so she takes less than she, could have gotten for it. She sees this thing happening. She was sleeping with the guy. I don't think she loved him. She was just trying to get her kicks and enjoy it. She has every right to do that. But it's a different type of thing than what Grace Kelly's character, has, which is like, this is who I am. I'm going to leave you now. If you're not on that noon train, that's it. Now, I think she comes to see something that Helen did teach her. I agree with that part, which is, if, when she says, like, if he were my man, I'd grab a gun with him. And that's what she has to learn. It's like, the fighting for your values. Like, her convictions were wrong. His convictions are correct. But the fact that she's so stolidly behind her convictions in a story about integrity is admirable in my view.
Yeah.
So I really liked Amy a lot for that reason. But people with integrity could be the most frustrating people in the world.
She lacks
because of this thing.
independence. That's the only thing with.
when they're idealists and their ideals aren't necessarily integrated to
Well, that
reality,
too, yeah, that's a good point.
they're very
Yeah.
frustrating.
Especially then.
But
But even if not, I just think there's something about like that solidness that you're always up against in a sense. But I agree with what you're saying.
I'd like to know examples of that because I mean I find people who think they're always right annoying, who never give
Yeah.
quarter in an argument. That's annoying because they don't seem to be entertaining another side. But I haven't witnessed integrity that is rooted in principles that are in turn rooted in the context of our lives. Crazy making. It seems you know
I wouldn't say crazy making. The way I think about it is it's more like you're bouncing against a wall, and that wall could be firmly rooted in reality. It's good. You may be having the problem. It is felt as a frustration because they're so stolid and unmoving. Until you find out that, oh, yeah, they're good or they're not. Like they have integrity and a bad, like in Christianity. And it's like, okay, this is not good. But Jennifer, you were going to say something?
I think what I didn't like about Amy is she came across as so dependent, whereas Helen is independent.
How is she
So,
dependent? Like, because she's
well,
getting,
she's just going from her husband back to her family, going to get on a train and go back to her family. And
oh,
she doesn't seem like the person, like Helen has made a life despite men. She's made a life and she's surviving and she's dealing with reality. And I feel like Amy's just, I'm like, yeah, anybody can do that. Get on a train and go back home.
She's definitely a modern. Helen is definitely, in the eyes of I think modern women, more relatable, because of her brand of independence. But Grace Kelly's character, it seems to me to be is very independent at a time when rejecting a man after marriage and saying, "This is it. This is my line in the sand." Literally 10 minutes after they've been married.
yeah, if that.
At that
Yeah.
time, carried
Yeah.
that separation, divorce or whatever that implied it was almost a death sentence for a woman back then. That's a terrible place for a woman to go, and yet she was willing to do it because of her principles. And I agree with you, Kirk. Juxtaposed with her soft or classically beautiful looks, that are very feminine. It's a very interesting casting choice because she is hard as nails. And I actually, when I was watching a movie, and it makes me wonder if I would have the strength to go, I gotta stay. I'm sorry, because the love of my life is leaving me. Would I have the strength to actually say, let this evil pass? Maybe I'll deal with it another time. Maybe it'll pass over my head. I might crack.
Yeah.
I might. She was so strong.
Yeah, really
I thought what
stressed
was
it
so
down.
interesting though is she makes that decision after she hears the gunshot, and it's almost like an automated response for her. She hears the gunshot and she runs off the train in search of him, like understanding that the bad guys are in town, and so she just runs headlong into the danger. And I thought that was, and then she picks up a gun, which
And she kills somebody.
right, yeah, doesn't just pick up a gun, actually kills somebody,
Yeah.
saves to save Gary Cooper,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and she does everything in a wedding dress.
And remember, like one thing about her, sticking on the Amy thing is she's in that hotel, and we have to think of ourselves in 1850s or whatever. So this is a put together. She's a Christianish woman, right? She's Quaker, and she goes up into a dark woman's room. And what I mean by dark woman is this is the independent thing that is so admirable. And I agree, like living your own life is wonderful, but at this time, not only when it was 1951 when it was, or 52 I think, when it was filmed or produced, but also with the time that it's about, the Western, that's a big deal. And my knowledge about the genre is that the woman who's with the darker hair, the darker eyes, she's the sexually free woman. She's probably the head of a brothel of some sort. Like there's seedy things involved with this individual. For this woman to have the courage to go up those stairs into that room to learn the truth, says a lot about her character. She wants to know what's going on with that. Well, so there's something
You know
like,
what I think? I think you guys think she's pretty, and so you're making her.
no, I
Oh,
don't think so.
No,
making-
I also
That's what it
thought,
feels like.
I also
I'm
thought
sorry,
Helen
no.
I don't
was,
think,
Yeah,
yeah.
I liked Helen a lot. That's not my point. Yeah.
I also thought Helen
She was good.
was probably in a brothel or head of a brothel at one time. And when the town was swinging and going crazy, you know, that hotel was probably a center of business.
She's
for
associated with the villain. Like,
Yeah.
I don't remember the story, but she's very associated with him. She might have even dated him or something like that. I don't know.
I'm
But
just not giving Amy credit for going upstairs to talk to her. Like that was a real hard thing to do.
I think it
That's all I'm
was
saying.
given the time. I think
No.
okay.
I agree.
That's fine.
I agree with Kirk
I would
on it,
give-
though. I think it was a hard thing for her to do that.
Uh,
I think it'd be a hard thing to do in today's time, to go up and
go talk to the person?
but
yeah,
but
go
yeah.
talk to the woman that dated your husband.
Well, that
like
too,
that was
yeah,
the
that's-
girlfriend. Yeah, that's the implication. Go talk to the woman
but
that
it's
is
more than that.
heavily implied that was with your husband before.
But it's more than that. It's more
Yeah.
than yes, there's the personal there's the personal issue of confronting your husband's past lover and having it out with her. But at the time, what Helen represented and what I keep forgetting Grace Amy represented.
Amy.
Yeah, not only in the 19th century, but in the 1950s,
No.
it would be a very unseemly thing to do. So she's definitely stepping out. She has the courage to step outside of certain social conventions in order to figure stuff out, get to the truth, and that does say something about her character.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's more we could talk about. I do want to say, so Jax, you mentioned something because so there's something we mentioned earlier that I think is important is the character of Kane, the marshal. He is an archetypal character. So one of the things that we no longer have in our era is the clear image of that archetypal Western hero that I think was killed off in the 70s essentially and replaced by the anti-hero. But when you were a 1950s moviegoer and you had seen all the movies in the 30s and 40s and leading up to it in the Western in particular, you walk in, you have certain expectations. And you have certain expectations of what's going to happen, who's going to do what, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. The little boy saying, "Oh, who's the good guy?" Oh, he's the guy with the white hat. He's going to do the right thing, right? And that kind of moral clarity is a simple thing. And then what you do as a director and an artist is you could play around with that. And we could, if anyone's interested in continuing the Western thing, we can do, like, I think Oxbow Incident, which Mark has brought up, is a really good example of that. The Searchers, a really good example of that. There's these great examples of playing with that archetype of the psychology of what we had expected at the moviegoer at that time, which we don't have anymore. So when we see this today, all of that context is lost, but it's a genre movie, so it's different. A Western genre is different than some overall drama story that's trying to be in, like, I think Gone with the Wind could be seen at any time and it's fully encapsulated, but a genre movie is playing on particular tropes. And so we have to kind of take that into consideration, I think.
I think they harken back to that in movies like Tombstone, though.
Yeah.
So we did lose it for a while, maybe with the Wild Bunch and in movies like that, but I think there
High Plains Drifter.
High Plains Drifter, yeah, some of the Sergio Leone films, but we got it back in movies like Tombstone, where you see those archetypes, and you do know what to expect.
By the way, it was Clint Eastwood was the High Plains Drifter director, but so anyway, but I agree with that for the most part. I think this is a discussion for genre. I only bring it up because this actor and this character is so simple in a way, right? It's if you think about like how encapsulated the story is, like it starts literally on his wedding day. And I do have to say that they don't say husband and wife. I noticed this in a review I was reading, is they don't say husband and wife, they
It
say
said
man and wife. Yeah, right. And it's
Yeah.
and they do that a lot, where it's like they refer to the man theme over and over and over again, which again is a good artistry, right? It's a good focus on the thing. But it starts at the wedding. The action sequence is 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Like it's not that exciting. It's not, but it's all about the buildup. You have the clock going so slow, and that ballad of High Noon is a great ballad. Like I thought that was so epic, that song. It was so simple. He's walking down by himself, walking down, like just that imagery of the marshal walking alone. There's lots of imagery, like when the women are going by, Helen looks back and he's just standing there by himself, and he's just like this salt, and especially Gary Cooper's like tall and he's got that, like, he's like a pillar, right? I thought all that stuff was the imagery along with everything was so wonderful. I don't know what you guys thought about some of these other elements. And then I want to talk about acting as well.
I loved how they kept going back to the train tracks.
Yeah.
It was just that was really great artistry of you're just standing there and like the long train tracks, and you don't, then finally you see I think we hear the horn first. I think we hear the train horn first, and then they go back and you see the train coming. I thought, I really enjoyed that kind of.
It's like the devil
imagery.
coming to town. Like the
Right.
devil's coming to town, right? It's like its vanishing point, and it comes into your purview. Anybody notice how everyone was sweating? Everyone was sweating.
Yes.
Now,
It must have been really hot on that day when they were shooting that.
I think it was purposeful. I don't think it was just like it's hot. I think they were doing that purposefully, and there's something that's happening with that.
It's just another way to me, like you talk about the devices that's been used to heighten the tension. Going back to the clock, and there's just this dread of this thing happening, and you hear the ticking.
Yeah, yes.
Him trying to pull people in, and people are getting hotter and sweatier and more agitated and more confined, and more claustrophobic. Yeah, and as the movie goes on, so yeah, the pressing heat and the trapped feeling just keeps pressing in on you. So I agree with you. I don't know that it was a concession to an actual environment. It seemed like an artistic choice.
That is true, because they were getting like sweatier and
Sweaty.
sweatier. And
Yes.
they were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although, so something else interesting that I read is that one of the things that we notice about Gary Cooper in this is just kind of like this look of like agony and torture that he has on his face almost the entire film. And apparently he had a bleeding ulcer while shooting this and was in actual physical agony the entire time that he was filming.
Okay, hold on. I want to talk about the acting in 1 second. I want one last thing about this, because I mean, maybe that's true. But I don't know if that, I don't know what, anyway, because to me that would ruin everything if that was his decision. Because I think he was doing certain things purposefully, but I don't know. But I did want to say, like, one thing that I thought was interesting about the sweating, the way that they shot everything, the devil, the clock countdown, all that kind of adds up to is a kind of Judgment Day idea of like the devil's coming to town. That I heard some people talking about it as like in reference to that movie Joker, in a sense, where it's like chaos is coming, evil, madness, something. They talk about him as mad. There's even that scene with the chair where they look at the chair, and then off screen is that maniacal, like the guy's voice must have been crazy to do that. That's not how a normal person talks, but it's a great effect of like, I'm gonna kill you, Mr. Kane or whatever. And all that adds up to like this judgment. And the question is, what are they judging? And I think the best answer that I've seen, and I agree with, is like, where are all the men? Who's the men going to be to face this madness? And it is there's a kind of, I guess, symbolism, abstractness. Because again, when you look at the action scene, it's not that big a deal. It's like a couple minutes. It's all about the buildup to this horrible thing. And really the horrible thing just means evil in and of itself. So yeah, I do want to talk about acting, but if anybody had anything else to add to that, I want to talk about what Jax just mentioned, which I hope is not true.
I agree. It was all about the buildup, and that's part of the artistry of the film for me.
Yeah.
It builds tension. It holds your attention. It holds your attention, and you are on the same quest as Kane is on. You're looking for the real man, and every time he, goes to somebody, especially when he goes to his best friend, who finally, Lon Chaney Jr., finally refuses him. Um, it's a dramatic turning point for you as the individual watching it, just as it is for him, because all of his options are gone now. He's alone.
Okay, so let's talk about the acting. Just to launch you guys off, I want to hear your thoughts. So there's the scene that was, there's a lot of scenes that I thought Gary Cooper did phenomenal for me. And one of them was the subtlety of the scene when he goes to, I don't remember who it was, but he goes to someone's door and it's the guy is in the room. He's like, don't tell him I'm here. Don't tell him I'm here. And he goes in the back room. And then the wife has to lie for him. And just like the subtle realization, he's like, he went to church without you? Right. Like, and it was just like, he just that line and the way it was delivered. And he knows what's up. Right. And it's super clear he knows what's up, but he's letting them get away with it. And I don't know. Mark, Jax, Jennifer, what did you think of that? And then other things related.
I'll go last, but
Okay.
I definitely want to talk about that moment.
Yeah. Anybody else want to talk about that? And then again, we can talk about other things, but curious.
No, I mean, I thought that was a great moment that, I mean, it just showed, the husband's cowardice and Gary Cooper's, strength and to have to, there's no greater coward than, the one that hides behind his wife, I think, and kind of puts her out there to be go lie for me. That actor, by the way, I recognize him and I can't remember his name, but he was on MASH, who played the husband. I think he was Potter on MASH. He was a lot, because I recognize his voice. He has a very distinct voice.
And Dragnet.
Very, very different character that he played on MASH. But yeah, I mean, just I thought Gary Cooper did a really good job in portraying his just utter disappointment. Just by saying, like, oh, why didn't you go to church he went to church without you? And you just see it on his face and in his eyes that he's just bitterly disappointed, but he has to accept that reality, right? He can't, he can't, and maybe this goes toward Jennifer, maybe one of your critiques of, he's not like trying to convince them or use like negotiation skills and trying to, I guess trying to win people over. But I guess maybe back to what Mark had said about it earlier, I think he's kind of realized, well, shoot, if these people aren't with me now after everything I've done for them, they're never going to be with me. And so it's a hard truth that he's having to accept at the same time that he's having to make plans to fight these people.
Jennifer.
So, what you said, Kirk, that moment, I think, is one of the near perfect examples of subtext, where the writer writes one thing and the actor's thinking another. So what they're saying isn't what they're feeling. So I'm glad you pointed that out. That was really good. And I hadn't thought about it until now. I think what you say, Jax, about the convincing, probably I'm influenced because I just read Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, which is a phenomenal book about negotiating in a pragmatic way, not a theoretical way. And it's based on hostage negotiations. And there's all these great tools that you can use and I think if you use them properly, it just shows good leadership skills. To me, it would make him a more three-dimensional character to me. The fact that he just doesn't have those tools is just less impressive to me. That's just,
well, I don't
sorry.
think it's that three-dimensional. I agree with you. He's not a three-dimensional character. And I think a lot of the early Westerns, I think Stagecoach is a great example of it's basically a lot of the genre Westerns of this time, even Shane on a level is very like they come out of the mist, they do their thing. There's maybe a dilemma between civilization and the savagery, and they have their white hats. And the directors and the writers are kind of playing with this archetypal character. But yeah, I mean, this, even Ayn Rand gave this, criticism of it, of the Western. And so I think in general, you just have to accept, if you're going to watch this, that you're going to see a genre or an archetypal, not three
Except,
in this
except-
era.
except John Wayne's rebuttal and Rio Bravo. I don't think the main character is as cardboard, one-dimensional.
Okay, well, Rio Bravo is
Yeah.
my favorite movie, so we could definitely
Is
do that
it?
one. Oh yeah, I love Rio
Ooh.
Bravo. So,
Interesting.
but okay, so anyway, let's but
Mark, what
Mark,
did
I
you
would
think
love
of
to
that
hear,
moment?
starting with that scene and then other things that you might have on the acting, because I have other things to say, but I'm very curious of your thoughts. That
Yeah, so my comments on that scene will probably bleed over into pretty much every
okay,
scene.
yeah,
When Paul Newman was asked about his early work, and Paul Newman, of course, is a preeminent actor. He's one of the best actors that Hollywood has ever produced. When he was asked about his early work, what did he see? And he said, "I see a man doing too much." And given the body of his work, it's and as a trained actor myself, even in his early work, it's super hard to see him doing too much. But according to his standard, he was. And as he got older and more confident in himself, you definitely see him resting in himself and not indicating anything, which is what doing too much means. You compare, let's say, that scene that you're talking about to the scene in On the Waterfront where Marlon Brando's character and Eva Marie Saint confront each other across the table. And he's struggling with the moral dilemma as to whether or not to be a rat because he loves her. You will see completely different phenomena. What I saw in that moment was a man indicating that he knew what was going on. Brando understood that the audience does 95% of the acting for you. They're in the audience, they're suspending disbelief, they believe the story. All you have to do is a very little bit and they follow. Now that's tremendously liberating for an actor working. That should tell you all I have to do is know what I'm doing and how I feel about it and be in the moment, and whatever happens, it's likely going to be interpreted by the audience in the way it needs to be interpreted because they understand story even intuitively. So what I see throughout the movie is pulling faces and melodrama, but this is the time. I mean, this is the time when melodrama inspired that kind of acting. It wasn't until Montgomery Clift came out. It wasn't until Marlon Brando and James Dean that people saw that there was another way to approach the work, another way to do scenes. So, so Gary Cooper sort of falls into that old school for me, where he's not even, I mean, like a Jimmy Stewart never, from what I understand, I don't know that he took any acting, but he was always believable to me. There was never a moment where I thought that he pulled a face or did something false. He was completely committed to what he did. I always believed every word he said. I can't say the same thing for Gary Cooper. Now, that said, it's very possible that a personal story that I know might have interfered with my experience between Grace Kelly and Gary Cooper, because I do know that they had a torrid affair while they were having that, where they were doing that movie, and that he was married and he had affairs with every single one of his leading ladies, which has completely palled my contaminated my experience with Gary Cooper from here on in, knowing that two people representing the most virtuous people in the movie were probably two of the least virtuous people on the set. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's very similar to what Jax was saying about what was it, an ulcer? Is that what you
Yeah,
said,
he suffered from, Gary Cooper suffered from ulcers his whole like a great part of his adult life, and he I think he ended up dying of cancer, but he had a very serious bleeding ulcer during the filming, but he used it. He
Well, I'm not
used
even,
it
but it's not like the ulcer, Kirk, because I'm saying if they were in life morally reprehensible, playing morally admirable human beings. That's actually quite an acting feat. That's actually
Well, yeah, I guess
commended.
I guess what I'm saying is like they're similar to me in the sense that it's something outside of the movie that is affecting the internal or our interpretation of what's actually going on. So is it the art or the artist type thing? And can you separate those
Yeah,
things?
but I knew this when I saw Mr. Deeds.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
Okay, well, he's great in it. He's
Okay,
perfect. I mean,
I
I
see.
saw, and it didn't affect me in the slightest. This it did, because when
Yes.
he's pulling a face, he's pulling me out of my audience seat and into my judgment seat, and I can't really,
Hmm.
I'm not with him emotionally anymore.
Yeah, I mean, so do you guys see? Because I, I'm struggling with this one a little bit, and the pulling the face idea, like, so because when I saw him, what I was going through is that he is an archetype. He is like just the hero. I gotta do it, right? And that why? Because I gotta do it because I'm a man. That's what I do. And Helen says the same thing. He's gonna do it. Then nothing can stop him. And but the thing that I thought he portrayed without a lot of dialogue, without a lot of things, like things were being done around him, was that he was suffering internally from a like a desire to run away, and he was scared, and there was anguish and the fear and the uncertainty and all that stuff, but it didn't come out in, I had to have a speech and all this dialogue and debating stuff. It came out, and when he was walking down and then they moved into a close-up, you could see he was like, he looks around and maybe that's what you mean by pulling a face. Like he seemed like he was concerned and he doesn't want to do this, or he's sitting in his chair and he's talking to that guy that comes in, and he's like, I didn't know I was going to do this alone, I have a family. And he's like, go to your family then, right? He doesn't say it the way, he's a better actor than I am, but he's like, go to your family then. And again, he wasn't yelling, wasn't mad, but you could tell there was like a lot of turmoil within him. That's how I felt about
What did you guys think about the end of that scene where he sends the deputy away, basically, who realizes, oh, nobody else is helping, I can't do it. But at the end of that scene, he puts his head on the table, and it looks like we're meant to believe that he's crying, and then the boy comes in. But what did you guys make of that?
I definitely have
Like,
thoughts,
was
but
that, I mean,
Mark?
okay, so I will say
Yeah.
that actually popped me out a bit. I was like,
Hmm.
really?
So you thought it was
We're
too
crying
much?
now? Yeah, I thought it was too
Okay.
much.
Okay, so maybe that's Mark. Is that what you're talking about? Like
I mean,
we're doing it because
I didn't
I
even
see what
think
you're
he was, I
saying.
didn't think he was crying. I thought he was just at the end of his rope, and he was just sort of tired, exhausted, and
That's what I thought.
there was nowhere to turn, right? I mean, that's actually good writing, right? Because the hero has to be brought to the point where you think there's just no way he's going to get out of this problem. And
That's his point of no return.
yeah, I think it comes. Yeah, I think so. I think that was you see him give up hope in a way in that moment. And I never interpreted it as him crying. No, by pulling a face, I mean, let me try to pull one, and I sort of get close. Like if I'm here and I'm like,
Oh, I see.
I
Okay.
realize, I just
Hmm.
indicated that I realized something.
So you're
I don't have to indicate that I
interesting.
realized something. If I just look
You
at you,
just and you realize it.
don't say anything, but I know you're lying to me. I don't have to, my face doesn't have to pull back, my eyes don't have to bulge out. Nothing like that has to happen.
I
I
see.
am actually
Okay.
realizing, and the story, you as the
Huh.
audience member are saying, he fucking knows. Fuck, he knows. I
I
don't have
see.
to. So the actor has a very difficult task. The actor has to be very
Yeah.
deliberate and at the same time unconscious about what they're doing. So they have to automatize the values of the script to such a degree, the way a fighter automatizes a left hook and a right cross, so that in the moment it's reactive. It just happens. It's not pushed or forced. It's all just in the moment.
Mm.
And that's when you watch Brando in that scene with Eva Marie Saint when
Yeah.
she's holding his feet to the fire. Watch it I saw it on at the Cinerama frickin' Dome, which is this massive screen the size of Wisconsin. that if you are lying at all, it's 30 stories high and right in your face. Not 1 second was there dishonesty. But when Cooper does stuff like that, he's dishonest, and I get pulled out of it.
I mean, that's really interesting. That's something I'm going to have to process over time because that's very.
And here's
because
another way an actor does it. They stress their voice. When they're
yeah,
trying to show love, or your emotion, but they're not really feeling it. It's
Yeah.
pushing out of them. And that has the unconscious effect of making you as the audience member tense. Now, if you have absolutely no idea what acting is, what good acting is, and you go in there just with a suspension of disbelief, you're going to be far more accepting than somebody who does know what good acting is. But if once you understand some of the principles of acting, it's going to be, it's hard to watch that and
it pulls you out of it for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
So who do you
I
think,
get that.
Mark, who do you think was the best actor in High Noon?
Well, that's hard to say because I think the director had the style sort of went through every character, even through Thomas Mitchell. Now, Thomas Mitchell, who played the mayor of the town, you watch him in Stagecoach, and he is flawless. Like I look back at Stagecoach. When was Stagecoach done? 1939. 1939. Okay, so we're still in the era of a very broad acting where silent movie types and theater types are coming into the film world. So the acting is broad, it's big. And here comes this guy who's this drunk, but he's so good. He's so subtle. He's so simple. It's poetic. There's not a wasted move in him. It's all honest. It's whenever I see somebody in a movie from that age, Spencer Tracy would affect me that way. There are tons of people from that time hit me like, oh, they're extraordinary because they're not this style. They're rejecting that style, or they're just geniuses in their own right. So, but even Thomas Mitchell, when he makes his speech, there was an artifice about it. There was an artifice to the whole film and to all the acting. Even Bridges, who's normally a very good actor, and he's produced good actors, amazing actors. His son is Jeff is like a genius. I've worked with the guy; he's a genius. But
Didn't you stick his head in the toilet?
I stuck his head in the toilet. But I mean, I questioned him about acting. Whenever I get with really great actors, I talk to them about acting, and most of the time they're really, really open with me. I should write something about what all the actors have told me.
That'd be very valuable.
Yeah.
So
anyway, that's my
okay.
you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is something hopefully we'll continue and have other conversations about some of the movies you just mentioned and talk about the acting. But okay, so let's wrap up High Noon. So if you have anything to add, we could do that. But I did want to just close out with the interpretations that John Wayne and others had about it being communist. And we kind of mentioned that thing at the beginning, but we didn't, so it's like there's the toxic masculinity. There's, what's the story about? What is a man? All these types of things. But it was accused by John Wayne and Howard Hawks of being a communist story. I don't really see it.
I don't see it. It's a puzzle to me.
It can be seen. I think they're also reading into a lot, especially I think Stanley Kramer was the producer, and he was
yes, he was
he was communist.
Yeah, he was a real communist.
And he was actually like questioned later, and I think maybe even the writer of the film was they were all questioned by the House of Un-American Activities, and this was seen as a movie that decrying or basically accusing Hollywood of rolling over rolling over in the face of McCarthyism, and nobody in Hollywood was standing up. And so that's why it's sort of seen as this analogy, like Gary Cooper is the only person standing up, and the town is supposed to be Hollywood, not doing anything to stand up to these horrible things being done to people. So I think, but then at the same time, it's also seen as an amazing treatise for law and order as well.
Well, but okay. So one thing I can imagine critics thinking that, and that does actually make sense. But here's my view about the artistry of it is I think even if that were true, so even if he is a communist, like an actual communist, and I'm going to defend a communist for a second here, and he is a communist and he's writing something universal about the experience of not being defended, that's if that's what he's doing, then that's still art, and that's probably still could be very great art.
I agree.
I mean, Dostoevsky, like a lot of people wrote some amazing art, and they did not have good ideas, but they could still create good art. So, yeah, maybe he is a communist. I don't see this as like a communist story. If you want a really good example of this, there's a great book called Ayn Rand and the Song of Russia, where she analyzes the movie Song of Russia. She goes to HUAC and she talks about it, and her arguments are a little bit different than I think here. They're ideological, but there's other things. So anyway, I don't agree with John
Yeah,
Wayne. I don't know what John Wayne's
I don't
talking
agree
about.
that it was no, but
Now he may
this
have
is
a
the
personal
problem.
grudge, and that's different.
That's what I think. I
Yeah,
think it's
and
a
that's
personal
different.
thing. Like
Yeah.
this guy's a communist, you know, without
Yeah.
looking at the actual movie, because you've got this great theme of pacifism and that is represented through Grace Kelly's character. And at what point does this philosophy no longer work? At what point does this philosophy of pacifism no longer work? And it's the point at which your life is threatened. It's the point at which you either have to fight or die.
Well,
And
here's
I
the
thought
only.
that was a much better
Yeah,
theme
sorry.
than just overall communism.
I mean, here's the only argument I can think of that it could be communistic, and I have to think about this more. Is that it? So if we think about communism from its most base idea, or the most basic idea, that it's the society over the individual type thing. I guess there could be something where it's like the society is saying we need this sacrificial person, we need to have them sacrifice themselves. Now I think it's Hollywood, so they decided to have some maybe, but that it doesn't.
I saw it differently. I saw it when you guys told me this, the way I tried to integrate it was, well, what was the main complaint about the guy? He hurt business. Business was great when these crazy people were in town. Town was hopping, and he cut into their profits. And so one of the reasons they're not really going to go help him is because he screwed their businesses up. So that's the only integration I could make when you told me that, like, oh, it's profits over people, and that's how they're trying to show how evil capitalism is. Let's say it embraces these crazy characters because it brings lots of people into their hotels and brothels and shops, and now that they're gone,
Remember what the mayor says. So that's what the bad guys say, but the mayor says we can't have one shooting right outside here because all this investment from the north that's coming in is not going to come in if that happens, and we're going to lose 5 years of progress in this town. So so that's like a pro-capitalist argument. It's like getting all this capital they want the capital to flow in, and so like I just don't see it. I guess like the only thing I could see is the individual. That he has to sacrifice himself as the individual to the society, whether they want him to or not. That's his duty in a sense, and to that degree.
Yeah, but in the end, I mean, that's an interesting thing to bring up. But in the very end, he doesn't do that. At the end, he does what he needs to do as a man, and he stands up for what he knows is right. Yeah. And when he's done, he takes his tin star and he throws it on the ground. He's like, I'm out.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think it's a force. So it's a real force.
Yeah.
I see the point, but critics have very big imaginations too. Frustrated writers and actors themselves. So they have to make the thing bigger than it actually is. It's really a story about being a man.
I think so. Final thoughts from everybody. Mark, do you have final thoughts since you just spoke, and we can move on?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would recommend that people see it today. I think it should be remade. I think it could be remade.
Let's do it. Who wants to do it?
The less melodramatic style. I mean, they remade 3:10 from Yuma, and I think that was a very interesting movie. You had great actors like Russell Crowe in it. They could do the same thing with this and have a heroic but better actor in the part and better actresses in the other parts, and update it, and it would be a movie that kids could see because they would see virtue on display, and that would be a very good thing for modern kids.
I like that. All right. Jennifer, Jax, final thoughts?
I think people should watch it. I actually think it should be part of like film school, if it isn't already. Because I think it brings up so many interesting discussions about acting and artistry and acting of the time. I think it'd be an interesting movie to remake in a completely different setting, like almost pull it out of the Western setting. That might be an interesting way of kind of reframing that question by bringing it into kind of modern day times or even like futuristic times. That's what I think.
Yeah.
I don't have anything new really to say other than, I mean, I think it was like you guys say, it's a good piece of art. It's universal themes of integrity. Would be interesting to remake. Very thought-provoking. I think it should be seen with maybe also comparing to Rio Bravo, just so
Yeah.
you can get this other angle to it. Yeah, but I'm like this. It's not a thumbs up for me.
It's totally fair. Art is very personal. I'm with you. Okay, well, I think I already said my final thoughts. I think it's a very good movie, well made, and it's so concise that it's easy to hold up to before your mind and have some good thoughts on it. So, thank you everybody for watching The Viewing Room, and we'll tune in next time.